Microsoft just announced it's shutting down a massive data center operation in California. And the governor didn't just complain. He went ballistic in a press conference that's now going viral. But this isn't about partisan finger pointing, and it's not about tech company drama. This is about what happens when energy policy collides with industrial reality, and when the people writing the rules forget that data centers don't run on good intentions, they run on gigawatts. Here's what nobody is saying. This shutdown was entirely predictable. It's going to cascade across the state's economy in ways most people haven't calculated yet. And California just became the test case for whether America can keep the lights on in the AI age. I'm Emma Clark, and this channel exists to investigate the stories the mainstream media either buries or oversimplifies. If you value independent journalism that follows the money, the megawatts, and the consequences, subscribe right now. Hit the like button so this reaches more people, and drop a comment answering this. Do you think data centers should get priority access to electricity? Yes or no? I want to hear from you, because this debate is just getting started. Here's the core issue. Microsoft is pulling the plug on a $60 million data center expansion in San Bernardino County, California, a facility that was supposed to employ 800 people and anchor the region's transition into the digital economy. The official reason? They can't secure reliable, affordable electricity under California's current regulatory framework. The real reason California's grid is being managed like a political manifesto instead of an engineering system. And when you force companies to choose between operational stability and ideological compliance, they choose stability, which in this case means leaving. This isn't a tech story, it's an infrastructure story. It's about who gets power, who decides, and what happens when industrial scale demand meets ideology scale supply. We're going to walk through the timeline, the money, the decisions, and the workers who are about to pay the price. Let's go back to the beginning. 3 years ago, Microsoft announced it was scouting locations across the American Southwest for a next-generation data center campus designed to support its Azure cloud platform and emerging AI compute workloads. The company was looking at 5 states: California, Nevada, Arizona, Texas, and Utah. Each state was rolling out incentives, tax abatements, expedited permitting, infrastructure grants. California's pitch was aggressive. The state offered a 15-year property tax deferral, workforce training subsidies, and fast-track environmental review. San Bernardino County, still recovering from recession-era job losses, offered additional sweeteners: 900 acres of industrial land at below-market rates and commitments to upgrade local road infrastructure. On paper, California looked competitive. Microsoft moved forward. The company purchased the land in late 2022, filed permits in early 2023, and began site preparation that spring. Local officials celebrated. The mayor of Adelanto, the small city nearest to the site, called it a generational win. Construction contracts were signed. Electrical engineering firms began designing substation upgrades. The project was officially projected to bring 800 direct jobs, data center technicians, network engineers, security personnel, facility managers, and an estimated 2,200 indirect jobs in logistics, food services, and construction support. For a county where the unemployment rate still hovered above 7%, this was transformative. Then the power conversations began. Microsoft's engineers calculated that the facility, once fully operational, would require approximately 250 megawatts of continuous electricity, roughly equivalent to the consumption of a mid-sized American city. That's not unusual for a hyperscale data center. In fact, it's becoming standard as AI training workloads demand exponentially more compute density. But in California, that demand triggered a regulatory review process governed by the California Public Utilities Commission, the California Energy Commission, and the California Independent System Operator, 3 separate agencies with overlapping jurisdiction and often conflicting mandates. Microsoft applied for a dedicated grid connection in June 2023. The request entered what's called an interconnection study process, a multi-phase review that evaluates grid capacity, reliability impacts, renewable energy compliance, and environmental justice considerations. That process, according to state guidelines, is supposed to take between 12 and 18 months. For Microsoft, it took 26 months, and it never resulted in approval. Here's where the dominoes start falling. First, domino. California's grid is already operating near capacity during peak summer and winter months. The state's total installed generation capacity is approximately 78,000 megawatts, but actual available capacity during high demand periods is often 10 to 15% lower due to renewable intermittency, planned outages, and transmission constraints. Adding 250 megawatts of firm continuous demand in a region where transmission infrastructure is already aging was going to require either new generation or significant grid reinforcement. The California ISO told Microsoft that connecting the facility would require approximately $380 million in transmission upgrades, including a new substation and 40 mi of high-voltage line reinforcement. And here's the kicker. Microsoft would have to pay for it upfront with no guarantee of cost recovery. Translation, Microsoft was being asked to finance public grid infrastructure that would benefit the entire region, but the company would bear the full capital risk. That's not standard practice in most states. In Texas, for example, transmission costs for large industrial customers are typically socialized across the rate base or shared between the utility and the customer. In California, the regulatory philosophy has shifted toward making large users internalize their grid impact costs, which sounds fair in theory, but in practice, it turns every major project into a bespoke negotiation with uncertain timelines and costs that can double or triple during the approval process. Second domino, renewable energy mandates. California law requires that all new large electricity customers source 100% of their power from carbon-free resources by 2045, with interim benchmarks of 90% by 2035. For existing customers, the mandate ramps up gradually, but for new facilities like Microsoft's data center, the requirement was stricter. The company had to demonstrate that its incremental demand would be met with new renewable generation, not simply by purchasing existing renewable credits. In plain language, Microsoft couldn't just buy green power that was already being produced. It had to fund the construction of new solar or wind capacity equivalent to its load. Microsoft proposed a hybrid solution. The company would finance a 200 megawatt solar farm in Kern County and pair it with a 50 megawatt battery storage system, both of which would be dedicated to the DataSense load. The solar farm would take 3 years to permit and build. During that time, Microsoft would purchase power from the grid and offset it with renewable energy credits. That proposal entered review in January 2024. By July 2024, the California Energy Commission flagged concerns. The solar farm site was located in an area designated as potential habitat for the desert tortoise, a protected species under the Endangered Species Act. An environmental impact report would be required, adding 12 to 18 months to the timeline. The battery storage system, meanwhile, triggered a separate review under California's energy storage safety regulations, which were tightened after several high-profile battery fires at other facilities. That review required third-party engineering assessments, fire safety modeling, and local fire department sign-off. Third, domino costs started spiraling. Microsoft's initial $60 million capital budget for the data center itself, the building, servers, cooling systems, and backup generators was holding steady, but the ancillary costs were exploding. The transmission upgrades, $380 million. The solar farm and battery system, $420 million. Environmental reviews and legal compliance estimated at another $30 million. Delays were costing the company approximately $4 million per month in holding costs, financing charges, and lost revenue opportunity. By early 2025, the all-in project cost had ballooned to nearly $1.3 billion, more than 20 times the original data center construction budget. Let that sink in. The facility itself cost $60 million. The regulatory and infrastructure burden to get electricity to that facility cost over $1 billion. That's not a rounding error. That's a structural inversion. Meanwhile, Microsoft's competitors were making moves. In April 2025, Amazon Web Services announced a new data center campus in North Texas, permitted and operational in 14 months. Google broke ground on a facility in Utah with a 9-month interconnection approval. Both companies publicly cited streamlined regulatory processes and grid reliability as key factors in their site selection. Microsoft executives began asking a very simple question. Why are we fighting this battle in California when we can build faster, cheaper, and with less risk in a dozen other states? Internal documents later leaked to the press, and documents that were discussed in closed door meetings but never intended for public release revealed that Microsoft's leadership had set a deadline if the company didn't receive full interconnection approval and renewable energy certification by August 1st, 2025. The project would be canceled. That deadline passed. On August 14th, Microsoft sent a formal notice to San Bernardino County officials and the State Energy Commission. The project was being terminated. The land would be put up for sale, and all future West Coast data center expansion would be relocated to Nevada, Arizona, and Oregon. The governor's office was blindsided. According to sources inside the administration, senior officials had been assured by the California Public Utilities Commission that the Microsoft project was progressing and that approval was imminent. But the reality on the ground was different. The interconnection study had stalled because the California ISO couldn't get consensus from local transmission owners on cost allocation. The renewable energy certification was hung up in environmental review, and Microsoft, facing shareholder pressure to deploy capital efficiently, had simply run out of patience. On August 16th, the governor held a press conference. He was visibly angry. He called Microsoft's decision a betrayal of California workers and accused the company of abandoning its climate commitments for short-term profit. He announced that the state would launch an investigation into whether Microsoft had negotiated in bad faith and suggested that the company might face penalties under California's environmental disclosure laws. He demanded that Microsoft reconsider. Microsoft responded within hours. The company released a statement carefully worded, legally vetted, but unmistakably direct. It said, "We remain committed to California and to carbon F-free energy. However, we cannot move forward with projects where the regulatory timeline is undefined, the cost structure is prohibitive, and the risk of further delay is unacceptable. We made every effort to work within California's framework. That framework is not designed for the speed and scale that modern infrastructure requires." Translation: "You made this impossible, and we're out." The fallout was immediate. Within days, the mayor of Atlanta called the cancellation devastating and said the city had already borrowed $12 million to upgrade water and sewer infrastructure in anticipation of the data center's arrival. Those upgrades were now stranded costs. The County Economic Development Office estimated that the region had lost not just 800 direct jobs, but the entire downstream economic multiplier: construction contracts, supplier relationships, retail growth. Local news outlets interviewed families who had relocated to the area expecting long-term employment. One former construction supervisor said he'd turned down a job in Nevada because he thought the Microsoft project was a sure thing. Now he was unemployed. But the economic damage didn't stop at San Bernardino County. The cancellation sent a signal to every other tech company planning data center investments in California. The juice isn't worth the squeeze. Within 3 weeks, 2 smaller data center developers quietly withdrew permit applications in Northern California, citing uncertainty in the regulatory environment. A third company paused a planned expansion in Sacramento, saying it would reassess the economic viability of the project. Investment analysts began downgrading California's competitiveness in the data center sector. One report from a commercial real estate research firm estimated that the state could lose up to $15 billion in planned digital infrastructure investment over the next 5 years if the regulatory approach doesn't change. Think about that for a moment. $15 billion. That's not just data centers. That's the entire ecosystem that grows around them. Fiber optic networks, edge computing facilities, cloud service providers, cybersecurity firms, AI research labs. California has spent decades building a reputation as the global hub of technology innovation. But innovation requires infrastructure, and infrastructure requires electricity, and electricity in California has become a political football. Now let's talk about the workers who got caught in the middle. Maria Gutierrez is a single mother of 2 in Victorville, about 30 miles from the planned Microsoft site. She'd been working part-time at a retail job, making $60 an hour, barely covering rent and childcare. When Microsoft announced the project, she enrolled in a data center technician training program offered through the local community college, a program that was partially funded by Microsoft as part of the company's workforce development commitment. She completed the 6-month certification in July 2025, 2 weeks before Microsoft pulled the plug. She'd been promised an interview for a starting position paying $32 an hour with benefits. That interview never happened. She's now back at her retail job with student loan debt from the training program and no pathway to the career she was promised. Or take James Colton, a third-generation electrician who runs a small contracting firm in San Bernardino. His company had won a subcontract to install electrical distribution systems inside the data center, a contract worth approximately $4 million over 2 years. He'd hired 8 additional electricians in anticipation of the work and leased new equipment. When the project was canceled, he had to lay off 6 of those workers within a month. He's now facing the possibility of bankruptcy because he can't cover the lease payments on equipment he no longer needs. His family has been in California for 60 years. He told a local reporter he's now considering moving his business to Arizona. These aren't abstract statistics. These are people who made life decisions based on promises that were implicitly backed by the state's regulatory system. And when that system failed to deliver, they were left holding the bag. Now, here's the irony. California's energy policies are designed, at least in part, to promote exactly the kind of high-tech, high-wage jobs that the Microsoft data center would have created. The state's climate action plan explicitly calls for investments in clean energy infrastructure, grid modernization, and sustainable economic development. But in practice, the regulatory structure has become so fragmented, so risk-averse, and so process-heavy that it's actively preventing those investments from happening. You can't build a clean energy economy if you can't build anything at all. Let's zoom out and look at the bigger picture. California currently has approximately 200 operating data centers, representing about 18% of the nation's total data center capacity. But over the past 5 years, the state's share of new data center construction has dropped from 23% to 11%. Meanwhile, states like Virginia, Texas, and Ohio are seeing explosive growth. Virginia alone now accounts for nearly 30% of new data center development in the United States, driven by reliable electricity, low costs, and streamlined permitting. Texas has become the second largest data center market in the country, adding more capacity in the last 3 years than California has added in the last decade. Why does this matter? Because data centers are not optional infrastructure. They are the physical backbone of the digital economy. Every search query, every video stream, every financial transaction, every medical record, every autonomous vehicle algorithm, all of it runs on servers and data centers. As artificial intelligence becomes more integrated into daily life, the demand for compute capacity is going to increase exponentially. Some estimates suggest that data center electricity consumption in the United States will triple by 2035. If California can't accommodate that growth, the economic activity will simply move somewhere else and it won't come back. But there's a deeper issue here, one that goes beyond economics. This is about state capacity, the ability of government institutions to make decisions, execute plans, and deliver results at the speed and scale that modern society requires. California's regulatory system was built in an era when infrastructure projects were measured in decades, when environmental review processes could take years without consequence, when the economy moved slowly enough that delays were annoying but not fatal. That era is over. The global economy now moves at the speed of software deployment. Capital is mobile. Companies make site location decisions in months, not years. And if your regulatory system can't keep pace, you lose. The Microsoft cancellation exposed something uncomfortable. California's government is institutionally incapable of saying yes quickly. Even when state officials want a project to succeed, even when local communities are desperate for investment, even when the company is willing to meet every environmental standard and pay for grid upgrades, the system still can't deliver a timely decision. There are too many agencies, too many veto points, too many layers of review, too many opportunities for delay. And in a competitive market for infrastructure investment, delay is the same as denial. So what happens next? In the short term, California is going to face a reckoning. Other states are already running ads targeting California-based tech companies, offering faster permitting, lower costs, and regulatory certainty. Oregon, Nevada, and Arizona have all launched marketing campaigns explicitly contrasting their business climates with California's. Those campaigns are working. Data center developers are increasingly treating California as a secondary or tertiary option, not a first choice. In the medium term, the economic consequences are going to compound. Fewer data centers means less demand for local construction, less demand for electrical components, less demand for fiber optic cable, less demand for security services. It means fewer high-wage tech jobs and fewer pathways for workers without college degrees to enter the middle class. It means less tax revenue for local governments and less investment in public infrastructure. The Microsoft project alone would have generated an estimated $43 million in local tax revenue over 10 years. That money is now gone. And in the long term, California risks losing its position as the innovation capital of the world. Because here's the thing, you can't be a technology leader if you can't build technology infrastructure. Silicon Valley can design the most advanced AI systems on the planet. But if those systems have to run on servers in Texas or Virginia because California can't provide reliable electricity at scale, then the value creation happens somewhere else. The jobs happen somewhere else. The tax revenue happens somewhere else. And once that shift begins, it's very hard to reverse. The governor is now calling for emergency regulatory reform. He's announced a task force to streamline data center, permitting and accelerate grid interconnection approvals. He's proposing legislation to create a fast-track process for large-scale clean energy projects. He's promising that California will be competitive again. But here's the question nobody is asking. Why did it take $1 billion project cancellation and a public relations disaster to trigger this response? Why wasn't the system fixed before it failed? And here's the harder question. Is this fixable at all within California's current political and regulatory culture? Because the problem isn't just bureaucratic inefficiency. The problem is philosophical. There's a deep-rooted belief among many California policymakers that economic growth and environmental protection are inherently in conflict, and that when in doubt, you should slow things down, add more review, require more mitigation. That belief system works fine when growth is slow and demand is elastic. It fails catastrophically when growth is exponential and demand is inelastic. Data centers are inelastic demand. Companies need them now, not in 5 years after the environmental impact report is finalized. Let's recap the chain of events. California offered incentives to attract a major data center project. Microsoft accepted and began planning. The company then entered a regulatory process that took twice as long as promised, cost 20 times more than expected, and ultimately never delivered approval. Microsoft canceled the project and moved investment to other states. Workers lost jobs they were promised, local governments lost revenue they'd counted on, and California lost credibility as a place where you can actually build things. This wasn't bad luck. This was policy failure, and it's a failure that's going to be repeated unless the underlying system changes. Here's the final warning. This is not the last company that's going to leave California over energy policy. It's the first. The data center industry is watching this case closely, and the message they're receiving is clear. California is high risk. Other sectors are watching too. Advanced manufacturing, semiconductor fabrication, electric vehicle production, green hydrogen development. All of these industries require massive amounts of reliable electricity, and all of them are making location decisions right now. If California can't deliver power at the scale and speed these industries need, they'll go somewhere else. And when they do, they'll take tens of thousands of jobs, billions in investment, and decades of economic growth with them. So here's my accountability question for you, and I want you to answer this in the comments. If you were the governor of California, what would you do right now to fix this? Would you override the regulatory agencies and fast-track projects by executive order? Would you reform the permitting system entirely? Would you accept that some projects just aren't feasible under California's environmental standards and focus on other industries? Or would you do something else entirely? I'm genuinely curious how you'd navigate this, because there are no easy answers here. If you found this breakdown valuable, subscribe to the channel right now. Hit the like button and share this video with anyone who cares about infrastructure, energy policy, or the future of the American economy. Drop your answer to that question in the comments, and let's have a real conversation about how we solve this. Because one thing is certain, the story isn't over. California is either going to reform its system and prove it can still compete, or it's going to keep losing projects, losing jobs, and losing ground to states that figured out how to say yes. And which path the state chooses is going to be written in real time, starting right